Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Fatima Ismail, Clinical Psych and Joint Appointee to UCT. As part of our Social Responsiveness lecture today, for October Mental Health Month, we'd like to promote intellectual disability and music therapy. So on behalf of the Division of Intellectual Disability, I am delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Sunelle Fouche. Sunelle has quite an extensive CV. She graduated in 2001 from the University of Pretoria with a graduate in music therapy. She has over 2 decades of clinical practice experience as an HPCSA registered music therapist. In 2003, Sunelle co-founded the non-profit organization Music Works, which offers music therapy and after-school music programs to support the social and emotional well-being of young people in under-resourced community contexts in and around Cape Town. If I'm not mistaken, Sunelle, I think it is based in Lavender Hill. She is currently also pursuing a PhD in music therapy at the University of Pretoria, where she also serves as part-time lecturer and clinical supervisor for the master's program in music therapy. Wellenta here, Intellectual Disability Services has happily been a recipient of music therapy interns, which Sunelle supervises. Sunelle also serves as the treasurer on the board of the South African National Arts Therapies Association. And as both practitioner and researcher, she's committed to exploring and cultivating responsive, responsible, and culturally relevant approaches to music therapy within South African context of complex needs and also in line with the intellectual disability services and division goals. So today's presentation highlights the transformative potential of music therapy in creating inclusive practical experiences for people with intellectual disabilities. And the topic is titled Music Therapy and Intellectual Disability, Creating Inclusive Spaces for Meaningful Connection. For those of you that have not heard of music therapy, Sunelle will be advocating and creating awareness around what the therapy entails, and also research around how it points to music therapy's unique capacity to address diverse needs, physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and psychological through accessive, non-verbal musical engagement. And particularly valuable for individuals with communication challenges, music therapy opens pathways for expressive interaction and relationship development beyond the traditional means of verbal boundaries. So this presentation today will also share preliminary findings from a participatory action research study of Sunelle's PhD, where nurses and people with intellectual disabilities experiences of care relationships and music making findings are experienced. So this research examines how South African music therapy practice can evolve to benefit both direct service users and all stakeholders within this care ecology. So over to you, Sunelle, with your presentation. Thank you and a warm welcome to you for joining us today.
Thank you, Fatima, for that thorough introduction. It almost feels like I don't have much more to add. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share more about this profession. Just to give you an overview of what I will discuss today, I'll start by talking about what is music therapy and look at the evidence base for music therapy, specifically in intellectual disabilities. And then in the last part of the lecture, I will talk about the research that I've conducted on music therapy, musicking, and care relationships with people with intellectual disabilities. And just to say that while this presentation today focuses specifically on music therapy with people with intellectual disabilities, it's also important just to say that music therapists work with a wide range of clinical population groups across the lifespan. So to start at the very beginning, music therapists have a master's degree in music therapy, and at the moment, the only training institution that offers this qualification is at the University of Pretoria. So for entry into this program, the students need to also have at least 3 years of university level psychology. And this training also includes a 1,000-hour clinical internship, and it leads to registration with the Health Professions Council of South Africa. So music therapy is not an alternative therapy, but it is included within the allied health professions. So we're on the occupational therapy, medical orthotics, prosthetics, and the arts therapy board. And in South Africa, arts therapy includes art therapy, music, drama, and dance movement therapy. And then we have a professional association, Sonata. And you will find music therapists working in mostly in private practice. There are no public sector posts yet for music therapists. And some medical aids do cover music therapy fees. Music therapists are also working in NGO spaces, and then we have student placements at various psychiatric hospitals across South Africa. And for some of those placements are specifically within intellectual disability services. So a definition of music therapy, just to give you some sense of what the profession and the practice is about. It is a reflexive process. So music therapy is an interactive process. The therapist is continuously responding to what the client is bringing in the sessions, and they're assessing the client's needs and adjusting the process to meet the needs of the client. The therapist helps the client to optimize health, so supporting the person's well-being and potential. We use various facets of music experience, so we might use singing or playing instruments, moving to music, listening, or creating sounds. And the relationship formed through these musical interactions is the impetus for change. So it's the connection and the trust built through the musical relationship that creates positive change. And it's a professional practice component of a discipline that's informed by theory and research. So it's not just music activities, but it's an evidence-based healthcare practice. So you might be wondering, how does music therapy actually work? And what makes musical relationships so powerful, specifically for people with intellectual disabilities? And the answer lies in two key components that explain how natural communication, our natural communication for human connection. And the first is communicative musicality. So we all have musical communication abilities from birth, and you can think of how a caregiver might use a sing-song voice when they're engaging with a baby. And this is not learned behavior, but it's hardwired. So all human communication is fundamentally musical in nature. And when researchers analyzed recordings of carer-infant interaction, they noticed that babies instinctively respond to the carer's vocal patterns with perfectly coordinated body movements and facial expressions and sounds. So both the carer and the baby naturally take turns to match each other's emotional tone and to create rhythmic patterns together. And I'm going to share a short example of a mother and a baby using this musical communication. And I hope you can all hear the sound. It should be working fine, but let me know if there are any issues. Choo-choo. Choo-choo-choo-choo. Oh. Oh. Kush, kush, kush.
What you doing, Daddy? Huh?
Kush, kush, kush. Baby, he doesn't like the camera being there. Oh. 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 Where's the
a gorgeous baby. Huh? Chaka chaka. Chaka chaka chaka. Oh. 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 You're a retard. Oh. Oh. Chaka chaka. Chaka chaka.
So what's important to note is that even for people with intellectual disabilities, they do retain this foundational capacity for musical connection, even when verbal communication is challenged. And this communicative musicality provides a pathway for relationship and understanding that doesn't depend on language or on cognitive ability. The next concept I want to just touch on is this idea of interactional synchrony. And this is our ability to naturally coordinate with other people. And again, looking at mother-infant interaction, researchers found that babies have this inbuilt capacity not only to coordinate their movements, but also to synchronize with the carers' movements, their facial expressions and vocalizations, as you saw in this video. So, I mean, what we saw is a baby who could barely control his own body movements or her own body movements, but they can somehow perfectly time their responses to match the caregiver's rhythm. And the baby synchronizes to the mother. And when the mother's face lights up when the baby does this, then the baby responds with more coordinated movements. So this is what we call interactional synchrony. And it's not just something that happens between caregivers and babies, but we see this throughout life. So people naturally fall in step when walking together, or audiences start clapping in unison, or people unconsciously mirroring each other's facial expressions. And again, for people with intellectual disability, this capacity for synchrony often remains intact, even when language or cognitive processing might be challenging. They can still coordinate rhythmically and emotionally with others. So in music therapy, we intentionally create opportunities for this synchrony to happen. And the therapist carefully observes and matches the client's rhythms, their breathing, their movement patterns, the quality of their energy, and then reflects this in music. And I'll demonstrate this by sharing with you a clip from a music therapy session. This is from the Nordorf Robbins Music Therapy that's based in the UK. And in this video, you will see this interactional synchrony in action. So Mary is a child with intellectual disabilities, and she and the therapist are sitting at a keyboard. And you will see that the therapist is carefully matching Mary and her playing, but then she stops playing and the therapist continues to match her movements. And you will see how they're in sync together as they move together musically. So this is not just about two people making music together, but they're interacting and communicating through music. So Mary's disability might make it difficult for her to connect through language, but here she can experience the sense of connection and she can experience being heard and understood. So what happens in a music therapy session? You saw a little glimpse of this, but we generally mostly use improvisation, so spontaneous music making together, where there's no right or wrong way of playing. The therapist would be following the client's lead, and it's not about musical skill or performance. So it's not about teaching people to play an instrument. We also use specific percussion and melodic instruments that are easy to access, that you don't need specific training to play on. And the music therapist would then meet, join the client's musical world. They'll mirror the client's rhythm and tempo and energy levels, and they'll musically respond to the client's sounds and movements and emotions. So creating a sense for the client of being heard and understood. And this builds safety and connection through musical attunement. Now, we know that music is more than just sound, but that we feel things when we listen to music, right? So music is connected to our emotions. And in the next clip that I'm going to show, you will see this in action. So Jack is a client with intellectual disabilities and autism. And in this clip, you'll hear how the therapist matches Jack's vocal sounds. And I want you to listen to the emotional quality of the music. In the beginning, it's quite flowing and slow, and there's long phrases. And then Jack's movements become faster, and so the music also speeds up, and the quality, the affective quality of the music shifts.
Hiya, yeah, yeah,
Okay, so music therapy with people with intellectual disabilities has over 70 years of documented evidence. And systematic reviews demonstrate that music therapy addresses physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and psychological goals. Specific benefits include stress reduction and relaxation, emotional expression, increased self-awareness, and greater participation in activities. And for people with limited verbal communication, music provides a non-verbal pathway for interactive communication and for experiencing social connection. And the research is also pointing to the benefits for the caregivers and for the care relationship. So caregivers, when they are participating in music therapy sessions, then they might gain new insights into the person they support, which could strengthen the care relationship. Studies have also shown that including caregivers creates opportunities for more personal and less authoritative interactions, and this could lead to increased mutual understanding, empathy, and quality of life for both the carer and the person with intellectual disabilities. Now, it's important to say that music therapists did not invent this idea that music can be helpful. And especially here on the African continent, we know that music has been used as part of traditional healing practices since the beginning of time. And in everyday life, people use music for their own well-being. And we all know that music is alive and happening in South Africa. So it's not just something that we observe on a stage or at a concert, but as South African society, music is part of everyday life. And people use music in different ways for psychosocial purposes. So to feel connected to others, to express emotions, to mobilize. And Christopher Small is a musicologist who developed this term musicking. And what it means is that music is not a static object that we observe from a distance, but it's something that we do. And he's turned it into a verb, just as we have dancing. There is no verb for musicking in the English language. So this is what Small developed. So it describes this active participation in music. And the next clip I'm going to play is to illustrate this way in which South Africans use music in their everyday life. And this is a news clip that a journalist made during the devastating fires in Knysna in 2017. And firefighters were sent to Knysna from all over the country to fight the fires. And the journalist asked them why they sing when they are fighting fires. And I want you to listen to how the firefighters talk about how music helps.
Exhausted, away from home and missing their families, working on firefighters sing songs to motivate each other. Spending 12 hours on the fire line, battling blazes, firefighter Tabang Samson says singing songs together build trust amongst the teams.
The songs is what brings us together. Even if you come from another province, when we sing, we're all together. And it also helps to motivate us, our self-esteem. It's hype, it gives us the hype. It's teamwork, it's all about teamwork. We don't know each other, but when we sing, we all get together, we build that trust.
Samson says the songs also tell emotional stories about leaving home.
The one that I just sang, it's about you away, you went like to a fire line, like far away from home, and when you get home, you hear bad news that your brother just passed away and you didn't make it for his funeral. So most of the songs are very emotional that we sing. Most of them, like the one that they're singing now, he's talking about leaving his parents at home and coming to fight fire.
Mfikelo Paliso says the songs of motivation transcend cultural differences.
The songs that we sing is like a team spirit, because you are diverse, so now we have to communicate everyone, like we are colored person, so we have to accommodate everyone so that you can try to translate what does the song means to the others that they don't know. When we see someone maybe is tired, then we try to build that motivation to them. No, pick it up, you see. Yeah.
So just as these firefighters turn to music in crisis, I've also witnessed something similar in another challenging context, and this is the context in which this study was positioned. The research was located in an intellectual disability unit within a psychiatric hospital, and this is a long-term residential facility for adults with moderate to profound intellectual disabilities. And like mental health services globally, and especially the services for people with intellectual disabilities, this unit is underfunded and has a lack of adequate resources. But even in this space, music flourishes. And as I was supervising students at the site, I observed how the students invited nurses to join as musicking allies in their sessions with residents. And the nurses brought their own rich musicality to supplement and enrich the music therapy work. And just like the firefighters you just saw, these nurses intuitively drew on music's capacity for connection and for well-being. So I wanted to understand the mechanisms through which this was possible, how music operates within care relationships between nurses and people with intellectual disabilities. And so I turned to the experts in care relationships and caring and musicking, and the nurses and people with intellectual disabilities were the co-researchers in this research project. So the research questions were: how do nurses and people with intellectual disabilities experience and make sense of care relationships? How do they use music inside and outside of care settings? And how does musicking operate within these care relationships? And this last question was really to develop culturally relevant and contextually situated music therapy practices within a South African care context. So how can these experiences of the service users and nurses inform music therapy practice? And I had a dual lens in terms of a theoretical framework. So on the one side, I looked at care relationships through the feminist moral philosophy of care ethics, and Fisher and Tronto define care as a species activity that includes everything we do to continue and to maintain, continue, and repair our world. It's rooted in relational ontology, and it recognizes care relationships as interdependent and reciprocal, and that care, even an individual or a dyadic care relationship between a nurse and a resident, is located within a web of nested dependencies. So the capacity to give care depends on receiving care from others. And then in terms of the music, I looked at the musicking through a lens of music as a cultural immunogen. So music therapists have been calling for a more socially, culturally informed approaches to music therapy, which is specifically relevant for the South African context. And Reid developed this notion of music as a cultural immunogen. So immunogen behavior would be things that we do for health. So we might do exercise or eat healthy in order to maintain our health. But music is another cultural immunogen that can serve as a self-help technology. So the study followed an arts-based participatory action research design. And as I mentioned, I positioned the research practice as a form of care. So I considered the participants, who consisted of 48 nurses and 9 residents, as co-researchers in the project. They were the experts in care relationships and how musicking operates within these. And their contributions shaped all aspects of the research process. And the study consisted of 3 cycles. So in the first cycle, we did focus groups with nurses just to gain their interest in this area of inquiry and to assess the feasibility of a research project within the space. And in the second cycle, we had 10 focus groups with nurses where we explored their experiences of care relationships and musicking. And the findings I'm going to discuss is mostly drawing from the data that was generated during this cycle. And then in the third cycle, we had 9 focus groups with residents. The data generated by the nurses emerged in the form of stories. So I used narrative analysis for data analysis. And this was really a collaborative process of meaning making that started even within our focus group. So we created maps that captured the key insights of the story shared by the co-researchers, and I use these maps as the foundational reference point for developing analytic patterns. So turning to the study's findings, the stories that the nurses and the residents shared sketched a landscape of care and musicking. So really positioning this dyadic relationship, care relationship between a nurse and a person with intellectual disabilities within the ecology of intellectual disability care. And the nurses and the residents are the ones who have created this landscape through their daily activities of caring and musicking, their rhythms of life, and the stories that they shared through this project. And the landscape contains different features. So overarching is this climate of context, which describes the South Africa's quite volatile socioeconomic context of a long history of oppression and systemic poverty and chronically under-resourced mental health care spaces. And all of this permeates and shapes every aspect of this care landscape and the lives of the nurses and the residents who work and live here. The next feature is the care and musicking legacy. And here the nurses described the family support systems that guide and nourish and sustain their own capacity to care. And they also shared how their approach to caring is culturally informed and how musicking within care is also informed by cultural musical practices. And the next feature is the space of the nurse and resident care relationship. So this relationship within the care setting. And here the nurses describe the quality of the care relationships and also the highly specialized skills that they have to tune in and to determine the needs of residents, specifically those with profound intellectual disabilities. The nurses also shared stories about a caring community of practice amongst nurses, so how they support each other and learn from each other and are dependent on each other, and how singing together builds community and brings stress relief. And then the last feature in the landscape is the institutional care relationship, so the relationships nurses have with the institution and the broader systems that governs intellectual disability care. So I'm going to just highlight some stories and some elements within these landscapes. So in the care and musicking legacy feature, the nurses described the intergenerational and interdependent dynamic of family care systems. And they described these nested dependencies that care ethics theory highlights, where nurses continue to depend on extended families for childcare and financial support to sustain their own capacity to give care. And the nurses also shared how sometimes their children step in to take up care responsibilities around the house, and in doing so, bring relief to their caregiving load. As one nurse shared, my 21-year-old daughter is someone who cares for me and looks after me. She's always cleaning the house, and when I'm getting ready for work, she'll ask, "Mom, have you remembered to pack lunch?" And so she will pack my lunch for me. So what we see is that care is not an individual practice, but it's a collective practice. It's a cultural practice, and that it spans across generations. The nurses also described how care wisdom was passed down through family caregivers. Their caregivers' approaches have informed how they are caring for people with intellectual disability, so beyond the training they've received as nurses, but that these caregivers have taught them that caregiving requires devoted presence and skillful guidance, and these practices leave a lasting values-based foundation. So in the initial conversations, I asked the nurses to think about someone who have cared for them well, and Nurse Mvimbi drew this picture and shared this story. "This chicken represents my mom. As you know, a chicken with babies, it's very protective, and it guides the babies to hunt for food. And when they're older, the chicken allows them to be their own." The nurses also told stories of how they use music for self-care and for collective care within the space. And Nurse Lamini shared a story. This was quite particular about how the cultural practices around music informed how they were doing music as self-care for themselves, but also how they were using music in care relationships. And Nurse Lamini shared this story. She's a Xhosa woman, and she described this contrasting experience of singing in church versus singing in traditional ceremonies. When I sing in church, I don't think of myself as a good singer, but I try. Singing in church is like being in a choir with different voice groups, so you have to be a soprano or whatever. Singing in traditional ceremonies is different. You don't need soprano and whatever in traditional music. You just go with the flow. You just go for it. In traditional music, singing is like talking. It's like you talk, but you talk loud, and the others will join, and you sing the first line, and they join. So in the story, Nurse Lamini is directing our attention to two different musical worlds. In the church choir, she's questioning her singing abilities within this Western musical genre that categorizes voices and reflecting perhaps the colonial influence of formalized religion with its imposed values on who can and can't sing. But she contrasts this with traditional ceremonies, where singing functions more like amplified talking in the call and response style. And here anyone can start knowing others will join. And it creates a more equitable, inclusive space where it's less about singing the right notes and more about making your voice heard and having it supported by the group's responses. So the legacy around cultural practices of music flowed into how nurses cared for residents with music. So the next feature is this dyadic relationship between the nurse and the residents. And here they describe the quality and the dynamics of care relationships. They described the affective bond as caring for residents like they are family, and this was quite central to their approach to caring. Nurse Mbali described this. She said, everything we do for the patients, like the washing, feeding, giving medication, we have to do all of it with love and care. If you don't have that love, if you don't have that bond, then you don't care. We care for the patients as if they are family. I know that some patients do not even have people who visit them. And the nurses were quite, they strongly emphasized this point, which is part of this care context, is that very few residents do have family visitors. So orienting this affective bond towards love for the nurses becomes a moral imperative. If they don't do it, then no one else will. And they also contrasted this with caring in other mental health or psychiatric spaces where there isn't this long-term ongoing relationship with the residents. In their narratives, the nurses also described highly specialized communication strategies that they use to build relationships with residents and specifically residents with profound intellectual disability. And they spoke about tuning into residents, what we in music therapy discourse would call attunement. They described how they developed really remarkable tacit knowledge through experience of embodied communication. So using touch and voice and tonal quality, smell and movement, especially with residents with profound disabilities. And Nurse Desiree described this. I would play music loudly, sing, dance, and do everything. Music for our patients here, it stimulates them. It opens the heart, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. Even for patients who might be mute or deaf, through your body language, and even when you sing, they can still feel it. If you watch the patients, you will see that when you do this, the emotions come forth. You will see that they are moving their feet or their head, and they might smile, or maybe you can see it in their eyes. The nurses also described how they use singing as co-regulation of mood and behavior. Through tuning in, they're able to modulate residents' mood or shift the atmosphere in the ward. Nurse Ntombi said that S is one of my patients. He's very quiet, but he's not moody. He used to be able to walk, but now he's in a wheelchair, and because of this, he sometimes gets frustrated. I know that if I sing to him when he gets frustrated, then he will just start laughing. What the nurses have also described in this space is how musicking becomes a space or a milieu in which relational knowledge can be generated. So when they're making music with residents, they learn new things about them and sometimes surprising things. And this nurse described how she told the story of how they did the line dancing to the Jerusalem song during COVID. I don't know if you can remember that TikTok sensation. So she said that last week I played that song, it's the Jerusalem song in the ward. And I was so surprised to see R participating, singing, and she demonstrated how he was singing and smiling. And I thought, my goodness, this guy is often fighting with others, but look at him now. My word, he really enjoys the music. So wherever I'm working, there is always music playing. There will always be music playing because it's also for us as the nurses. It makes us feel better. And the nurses also shared stories about the challenges of caring for people with intellectual disability, especially when behavior might disrupt or rupture the care relationship. And Nurse Mbali gave a very poignant example of this. And in this story, she captures how she and Rosie, a resident, collaboratively navigate a bump in their relationship road. So it's a moment that poses potential risk for relationship rupture, but between them, they figure out how to maneuver in and through this moment with music's help. There's this one patient, Rosie. When it's time to wake her up in the morning, you must have a plan. Otherwise, she is going to try and hit you and scratch you and shout abusive slurs at you. But now, Wena, and then she started hugging herself and singing, Poco, 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 poco. This is my way of softening her. I don't know why I sing it. I think it's just something I do. Poco, poco, bye, pocolina. So I enter a room and I sing, ay, pocolina, ay, poco, poco. I open up the blankets and she doesn't try to hit me. She doesn't fight with me. She doesn't scratch me. Ay, pocolina, ay, poco, poco. I wash her, and when I finished washing her, I dress her, and then I take her to the dining room. So through the song, I'm showing her love. I'm giving her extra attention. And then I'll wash her gently, and now she'll be calm. Poco, poco, wash. The nurses also spoke about how they've developed this caring community of practice. So learning from and supporting one another, holding each other accountable. And here they told stories of how group singing affords opportunities to de-stress, to connect across cultural barriers, and where singing together embodied a sense of belonging and team spirit that they really needed to sustain them in this caregiving work. And in the highlands of, institutional care relationships, the nurses spoke about their relationships with the broader institution and how here they shared stories of supportive practices that supported their capacity to care, but also absences of care that made their work of caring more difficult. So just to end off, some key insights from these findings, what I have learned about this research as a music therapist is that nurses and people with intellectual disabilities are highly skilled musicians or music makers. They know how to use music and what music might be helpful for. Music creates a sense of community and connection. They speak about how they use music for co-regulating emotions and behavior. And in the focus group with the residents, they each chose a song. Not all of them had language, but we were able to find different songs that resonated with each one of them. And they each then practiced and rehearsed these songs with the group. And they'll be having a performance at the unit towards the end of this month. So for the residents, music enables a performance of identity. They could be this music-making person, the singer, with the choir accompanying them. And through this, they're performing a part of themselves that is vibrant and flourishing and able. Another insight is that when we're musicking together, then this is also a form of care. So it captures the key elements of what we do when we care. The nurses and the residents describe how they use music to tune in, and then the residents also tune into the nurses. And we can experience a sense of being in synchrony and with each other through music. So what does this mean for music therapy practice? When we look at it through the South African lens, then one thing is that as music therapists, we might want to shift our perspective away from only as a treatment, using music therapy as a treatment intervention for clinical outcomes, but also to open to a role that we can play in institutional settings, in how music can be used for and as care, and how we can support caregivers to be more conscious about how they can integrate music and singing and dancing into their everyday care practices, with the aim of building and strengthening care relationships. And we can also use music for advocacy. So, as I mentioned, the residents are rehearsing these songs for a performance. And through these songs, the residents, there's an opportunity for advocacy where their identity, their vibrant abilities of people with intellectual disability can be performed as a way to challenge stigma and raise awareness around the needs of people with intellectual disabilities. So I'm going to just end off with one last clip, which is from one of the sessions with the residents. And I want you to listen specifically to the male voice. We are singing Amazing Grace, and this voice belongs to Mr. A. He's been in this residential facility for many, many years, and old age has further challenged his cognitive capacities. And often in the ward, you would see him sitting in a frozen state, seemingly unaware of what is happening around him. But he is an exceptional singer, and his music abilities has remained fully intact. So I want you to listen to how he harmonizes in the first verse of the song. He's singing a duet with another resident. I'm supporting them on guitar, and I'm also singing along. And you will hear that after the first verse, I invite the whole group, and now you'll also hear other voices joining in. To just leave you with this message that music is a flourishing resource in intellectual disability care spaces, but also in many other mental health spaces as well. And while music therapy can be a very helpful intervention for people with intellectual disabilities or people experiencing other kinds of mental health challenges, there are also lots of other ways in which music can be integrated into care spaces. And this is something that music therapists can also help with. Okay.